5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is Chad here, and you're listening to My Alien Life.
Hello, futurelings and listeners around the world. It's Monday, April 20, 2020. Welcome to My Alien Life. Tonight, we look back at how this all started. It's my great honor to be able to bring you the stories that have shaped who we are. Together this week, we'll travel back in time to hear some of the stories that maybe you haven't heard before. These are the shows that started it all, real events that even today I find incredible. Be sure to listen Wednesday night to My Alien Life podcast. I am joined by my two best friends in a 2-hour interview that is full of foul language and inappropriate behavior, of course. I tell them about our group abduction in 1984. Jeff and Mark both remember our adventure that night with one important detail omitted: how and when they got home. You've heard this story. Now you get to hear all about what really happened that night when a flat tire literally transported them through what would be the most extraordinary adventures of their lives. That and more is coming up on My Alien Life. My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brauer. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, 1, 0, and liftoff.
This show has been edited and remixed, and it originally aired February 20th, 2019. Since then, we have had many amazing guests and so many incredible listeners from around the world. Thank you for listening to My Alien Life. You're listening as I describe the events of my life for the very first time. These stories are pulled from my memory, and some are decades old. Since about 1972, I have had experiences that may sound familiar or may even revive memories some of you have kept secret or have ignored, or as an act of self-preservation have forgotten on purpose. I've done all the above, and that may mean we have a lot in common. This is a UFO story, it's an alien story, an abduction story, but mostly it's a story of survival and coping. It's a story of preparing for the worst and hoping for the best, and it's true. Most of my life, very uneventful. I grew up just like most kids. I had a lot of friends. I went to school. I rode my bike. Went to high school, college, got married. I had kids. A fairly typical American life that was injected with some terrifying moments that I'm now talking about. Some of those moments I remember like I was living them right now. Others I have tucked away in order to keep my sort of typical American life sane and keep it as normal as the best I can. So join me and experience my alien life. A little bit about me. My childhood was strange, putting it lightly. I had a great family, great home, great teachers. I hid a lot of anxiety that was caused by outsiders, and for the most part of it, it was a life greater than this kid should have put up with, the good and bad. It was tough for me to be a kid and to shoulder some of the things I was put through, and I had to figure this all out by myself. I absolutely knew I couldn't tell anyone about my experiences, and who would believe me? The real world's tough enough when you add some unbelievable experience that no one else knew you're having, and it made it so much worse. I was born and raised in Montana. I've moved a couple of times in my life, but have never left the Northwest. I currently live in Montana. I grew up in a very, very rural town that was basically a small town with a post office and 2 drinking establishments, which describes half the towns in Montana. Again, like most towns, I went to school through 8th grade in one town and high school in another town. Some of my friends drove to school starting at 12 years old. I started working very, very young. I started working for anyone who would hire me at 13 years old, and I worked in and throughout the county until I left for college. My 4 years at the university were really uneventful, good times. I had many, many good times, probably more than anyone should, with the exception of a couple of events I will talk about another day. The university was a safe haven for me. The university life was safe for me. I was incredibly happy and thought I left all the terrifying events of my life behind. I did have a girlfriend like most guys back then and did spend a lot of weekends traveling to my hometown to visit. Kind of a mistake. After a couple of years of going back and forth to the hometown, I ended up ending that relationship, and I didn't spend another night at home back in my hometown. Past events back there they were painful. Didn't want to repeat anything that had happened to me so far back then. It was a painful place to grow up as well. So I made it through college barely. 2 years after college, I moved. One of the concerns was finding a place to live that I felt was safe all the time. I didn't want to relive any of these experiences, and I didn't want to move anywhere where I thought that this, things like this that have happened to me so long ago could happen again. So it was worth mentioning, I guess, that I was never physically harmed. I did suffer a lot of anxiety and mental strain caused by my experiences, and that kind of manifested itself with sleepless nights, exhaustion, heart palpitations, and many, many stomach issues, migraine headaches, and there was the fear of the unknown, which is a killer. All of the events that happened to me were terrifying. They also made me question, what if? Always thinking, what if? I'm 75% sure I knew what they wanted. I was almost sure I knew what they were doing, but that mental fear of the unknown tears you apart. And there's nothing more unknown than some kind of being that invades your personal space and takes away your control. I was unable to do anything but think and observe during these times. I was lucky I was able to think, because I know, in fact, that others who have lived through this experience weren't able to even think or remember. I know there were others out there who have lived through that and lived through all these things that I've lived through, yet there's a lot of people out there that have no idea that this had happened to them. If they have an idea that something did happen, they have no idea exactly what happened. I have no recollection of getting examined, implanted with any devices, and I definitely was not probed. Shortly after college, I got married. I started working for the Forest Service, where I'd spend great amounts of time in the woods all by myself. I had heard UFO stories and read about people like Travis Walton, who was abducted in the woods back in the 70s, but I was really never worried in the woods. I knew the prairie behind my childhood home was a place where I could go if I ever felt needed. If I ever needed something incredibly weird to happen, I could just go back home. That place to this day, I know, would never disappoint me. I know I could go back there and it wouldn't be long before some sort of terrifying event would change my life again. The Forest Service was kind of a stepping stone to my current career, which has lasted at least 25 years and still going pretty strong. Turning the key to the same office for 25 years is sometimes monotonous, but it was also one of those lifetime decisions that provided me with a job security and something I could count on and escape old memories and escape those memories in a daily grind. So I was always running, figuratively. I kept myself busy to the point of exhaustion. I moved a couple of 100 miles away from my hometown and kept really, really, really busy, and thought exhaustion could make me sleep and I could work, exercise, and work myself into exhaustion. And they wouldn't bother me because there would be nothing left, and nothing left that they would want. And why? Why would they want me in the first place? I always had these thoughts for so long. Hadn't they gotten enough from me? What more? What more could they get? What else was there? There had to be so many people other than me that were so much more interesting. So I kept really, really busy to protect myself from the unknown. And really all I had to do was accept what was happening to my somehow in some way. And there's no doubt that these physical and mental problems I was having would go away if I could just face those fears. But fear of the unknown is one of those things that would and does potentially tear us apart. So I was running, and as a kid, and especially as a teenager. In 1982, I had the opportunity to work at a radio station tucked in the middle of Montana and pretty near nowhere. And at the same time, I was in high school and I was playing football, basketball, and of course studying. My favorite subject was science. And I did fairly well with that and earned enough scholarship money through science fairs to attend a couple of years of college to get me started. But radio was one of those things that I stepped in and was so comfortable. I was good at it. And so my second year of high school, I was able to procure a job at a radio station purely by accident. I had written a letter to a radio station because it was an assignment for a class in high school. And they actually called me like 2 days later after I mailed that letter. And within about a week, I was working at this radio station. I'd drive 25 miles after football practice and work at a radio station, which was an AM station, for about 6 hours. The radio station played 45s or albums. It had 2 turntables. And I would literally sit there and play music all night long. I would read the weather. I would read the news. And if I ever needed to go to the bathroom, I would actually have to put on a record that would last like 4 or 5 minutes. And I had a couple that stood by there, and couple of records that I could put on anytime. They were my bathroom records. But I kind of had myself a little show, and my friends from high school would listen. And so I'd arrive there usually in the early evening, maybe 6 to 8 o'clock, just depending on what time I was getting done with school or football or basketball practice. And I would stay there until they signed off at night. And they signed off different times during the night. Back in the day when some radio stations didn't go 24 hours. This one, I think weekdays was 11:30 and weekends was 1:30 a.m. And so yeah, I'd play some adult music, some music that normally I wouldn't listen to, but I got to listen to some music that I normally wouldn't. So I found some favorites, and I still have some favorites back then. But after my on-air shift, I'd vacuum, I'd take out the trash, and then I'd drive 25 miles home by myself across the prairie at like 1:32 a.m., where I had all the time in the world to think about AM radio and listen to other AM radio stations, and would listen to how other announcers did their show. I could pick up radio stations from Canada and California, and even almost the Midwest at nighttime in northern Montana. 25 miles all the way home in my 1965 Chevy that was given to me by my grandfather. And, thinking about all kinds of things, I would look up and see the northern lights and see other things in the sky, most of them easily explained. But there were those nights where things would happen that would be etched in my memory. There were a couple nights I couldn't forget no matter how I tried. And even though on those nights I prepared for the worst because I was expecting it, I was always hoping for the best. And there was no doubt in my mind that events would happen in the future that would become part of this alien life that I was having. It was challenging to go to work, go to school, play in sports. Very challenging. And I wasn't an overachiever. I didn't have very good grades, and I was always very busy, and I think it was for the better to keep my mind working at that time. It helped me cope with some trauma that was going on. I would have a lot less time to think about things that were happening to me and all the things that have happened, things that I possibly knew would happen again. I had a lot less time if I was busy. Living in a rural community also meant a lot of driving to other places. Like I actually drove to school. I drove to school dances at night. I drove a lot. Sometimes I would just drive to drive, and I always ended up traveling alone at night across the prairie. The prairie I grew up on was amazing. It was a beautiful, beautiful spot, especially in the springtime. And there was some cactus out there, and you'd see cactus flowers and deer and antelope and gophers and badgers and coyotes. And at night you could hear the coyotes. And there were, certain nights that you would look at this amazing black sky because there was no streetlights around there, and you'd look at the sky and you would see the northern lights, and it was those nights that I felt like I could look in the sky forever, but I was also terrified at times of what I would see. Nighttime on the prairie is a really lonely time. You can hear your voice travel. Even if you're talking at normal conversation volume, you can hear your voice travel and not really echo, but everything is just so amplified. And I spent a lot of time with friends sleeping outside, and we'd look up at the sky, and at that time you didn't see as many satellites as you do now. So anything that was moving across the sky, got our attention immediately, and we would speculate and talk about what that could possibly be as we slept outside on those nights and just told ghost stories and UFO stories and things that we had heard, and it was a great place to grow up. Great place to grow up. And even though that prairie could be terrifying at night, I put myself out there over and over, and there's nothing I'd rather do than, and one of my favorite things ever would be to walk out on the prairie in the early morning or late afternoon where I grew up, almost willing bad things to happen. And it just seemed I didn't have control over that. I would end up in the dark prairie at night driving, but I never had a lot of anxious moments knowing I was going to drive, and I would put myself out there in my car, and sometimes I've had anxious moments while I was driving, but even though I knew something could possibly happen, I had never stopped myself. I always drove out there, drove to different high school events and drove home from dances, and I didn't have any problem with that, even though things did happen and could happen in the future. The odds were in my favor that nothing bad would happen, and it'd just be me in a peaceful drive with my car, and for the most part I couldn't be happier. So yeah, back then it was a lot of responsibility for a high school kid. It was stressful at times because there was so much happening. I couldn't explain all that, so I tried to stay busy and not think about all the things that were bad and those bad things that could actually happen. There are people who have seen UFOs, aliens, and those who share similar stories, but my story's different. Not only did I have a profound and amazing experience and have faced travelers from other places or dimensions, I have also experienced it in many ways. There have been dreams, visions of the future, and a sort of extrasensory perception and images I have seen in and from others. So I'll explain that more another time, but even visions of the future and so much more that will be part of other shows, and we'll talk about that. And I'll try to put that into context and even interpret some of those events that I can't explain. It would be great if you could do that with me, and we can help each other explain events that have been a mystery and may have shaped our lives at the same time. There's so many stories about UFOs, alien abductions, who's right and who's wrong. There are people who became famous because of their amazing stories. I like to think my story is not sensationalized or exaggerated, and I'm not saying theirs are, but I really wanted to keep me simple, my story simple, because it's so much easier for me to understand, and I know when the time came to tell my story, which is now, it would be so much easier to relate to the skeptic or those who aren't really interested. And I'm trying to convince really anyone. I don't want to have to feel I have to convince anyone, but I would like somebody to believe me. I don't have a propaganda or try to flip opinions or I don't try to flip opinions I don't want to become famous. It's important for me to understand how and what happened. I feel it will be so freeing to put this on a timeline and figure it out and just get it out. Just to possibly move on and try to feel like these events, never happened. Maybe like they would feel like a dream, possibly. I don't know. But I want to feel like the normal small town guy I grew up as and who is now leading a slightly boring but fulfilling life. So to me, there are some believable accounts of intelligent mobile organisms. I'm not trying to coin a new term for aliens, but I've never been able to call them aliens really because I don't know if they're visitors or aliens or spacemen. So I'm just going to call them IMOs or EMOs, which basically is my little acronym for intelligent mobile organisms. That term only refers to what I've experienced. So if you're Whitley Strieber, you can call them visitors or whatever you want. But mine experiences are slightly different. Well, actually, a lot of different experiences than other people have. So that's why I came up with the acronym IMO, or intelligent mobile organism. Many accounts that many of us have heard since the early 70s are compelling and sometimes disturbing. Some are really convincing, and I will never tell you who's right or wrong. I won't tell you who I believe, and I won't tell you anyone is crazy for what they believe. I respect anyone who has had an experience that has altered their life and makes the already complex art of living more difficult. So I'll tell you that there are stories, videos, photos, artist depictions, and other interpretive events that to me is eerily similar to my experiences, and I'll talk about that. So I've seen evidence of others that are incredibly similar to mine, but again, mine are different. Some of those experiences I've seen to a degree, it's almost like somebody pulled that image out of my mind, and they're that similar, but with differences. There are also experiences by others that I cannot feel could be even possible, and I'll explain why I feel that way, and we'll get into that again in later episodes. The intent of telling and discovering my story is to explore the realness and to keep it raw and interesting. A lot of this will be hard to talk about. Most of this is hard for me to talk about. All of it's hard to think about. It's one of those things that I don't like to do. I don't like to think about it. Most of us grew up in communities with friends, relatives, and everything else that makes us. And in short periods of time, we change and adapt, and we get used to almost anything. We reach a point where we are desensitized by so much. Can it be possible to lower our awareness of everyday events to a degree where we can even get used to negative parts of life that destroy us? Can we ignore pain as a coping skill? Yeah, I believe that happens. So what if we were subjected to torment, abuse, and even regular abduction from beings from another planet or dimension? Can we get used to that? Can we reach a point where this is just part of our life and we grow to tolerate and even ignore it? I want us to look at that. I want to look at my life and rediscover events that I can't explain. I want to rediscover my alien life. It happened. I have no doubt it happened. I was visited more times in ways than I can even recall. It's not like you see in the movies. Some of the memories are vivid, others are not so much. I do know that each time I revisit these events, my memory is clear. There's so much I didn't want to remember, and there's so much I try not to remember. So much I buried in the back of my mind that is basically waiting there to resurface. I've explored every angle in my head, what happened to me. I kicked around a lot of sketchy scenarios to friends and explored every angle. But yeah, I talk about it and everything gets clear. I tried to attribute these events to some strange state of mind and anything that I could think of. It was easier for me to pretend that I was losing my mind at times. And when I said I talked about it with friends, it basically, I would throw these little segues into conversations and would hope that I could actually get a conversation started about these things that have happened to me, but it just never really happened. It's just hard to imagine now, or even then, me picking up a conversation with a friend and telling them that I've had these experiences. I have a few extremely vivid memories prior to 1972. A couple of them in particular, but one when I know I was 5 years old. There's a memory of me getting my tonsils out, and it was a lot scarier than it should have been. There's a memory of going to the hospital and just being left there, being in a room alone and being attended to by some oddly tall people. And I could never see or remember their faces. Their faces were always covered. These memories are very vivid, but at the same time, I have a memory of my parents being there. I remember going to the hospital and being with my parents and my older brother, who was also having his tonsils taken out. We were both having our tonsils taken out at the same time. Our local doctor was really into removing tonsils, and most of the people in our county had them removed, but that's an entirely different story, and we could talk about that another time. But yes, there's two separate memories of the same event that I have, and it's a really strange feeling. And then there's many vivid memories of these awkward, tall people years later. It took me until I was about 45 years old to realize these awkward figures were the same I had experienced in a memory of me getting my tonsils out. And, yeah. Wow. Where had I gone as a 5-year-old to see tall people, and why does my memory seem to parallel this tonsillectomy? Why is there two memories that I had getting my tonsils out in a hospital? I don't know, but I'd like to explore that a little bit too. In this, and where all things in life started with me and growing up, I think that things that have happened to me have always happened to me. And even when I was younger than I can possibly imagine. So that's one of the many questions I'm hoping this podcast will solve, and all those early pieces of the puzzle are slowly coming together and giving me an actual accurate view and to what has been happening to me for decades. No, I don't believe really that there was some sort of alien examination, not a physical exam or an alien probing. These intelligent mobile organisms were very interested in me, but not in the way that you're used to hearing. There had been two events in my life that shaped me more than the rest combined. I'm hesitant to label them. I'll get to those in future podcasts, but let's just say they were close encounters, and they don't really fit into the parameters of the close encounter scale, and we'll talk about those and more on future podcasts. So,
My Alien Life Podcast.
you can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.